Oh, wait. Next
About
April.
that. Sorry about that.
It's under more.
Yeah. Stop recording now.
Shall we give it, do we want to wait till 10 or shall we just give it one more minute?
I think we can give it 5 past. That should still
2
be.
minutes past 10 now.
Yeah.
Who's sharing the screen? Oh, is that?
Was not me.
Somebody sharing the screen. No, I'm not.
Somebody shared a screen.
It's still there.
No.
It's
Right, I do think we should start. So, a very warm welcome to all the colleagues who have joined us this morning. I'm very pleased that you have returned to the last session, the third session. So, it might seem odd that we're calling this session 3, but session 1 did actually happen way back in November 2020, but that's sort of ancient history by now. But most of you will have joined us last week for a very interesting session, and today is going to be very much hands-on, so it will be very exciting because we'll actually get our hands dirty and involved, and we'll be involved in actually working through a number of interesting tasks that the UCT team have prepared for us. So I'm going to hand you over shortly to our 3 UCT facilitators, Sanette Stein, Robert Prince, and Precious Mudavanu. So you'll be in capable hands, and with a team from Sadie, Fatima, Maureen offering technical support. So I won't keep you any longer, just to say I hope you have a very productive, useful, and enjoyable session today, and that the breakaway session and the hands-on activities will really be useful to everybody. So wishing you all a fruitful deliberation. Thank you.
Thank you, madam.
Good morning, colleagues. Just before we start, I'm sharing a link in the chat to the recordings from the previous sessions. It is on the Sia Phumelela website under services. You'll find the first one we did and a copy of last week's recording. And once this has gone through all the necessary things, the one from this session, it will be added to that. So you will have access to the recordings. So let me just open everything up. Welcome to this session. This is, as Marilla mentioned, our second session for this little bit, but the third session in our series to the one we did last week, where we talked about the ins and outs of designing a diagnostic assessment instrument and how you can try and understand that instrument better so that you can use the information optimally. So today's webinar, we will be taking a bit of a more hands-on approach. We'll go through a scenario and show you how you can utilize this type of information. And then we'll have you in the breakaway rooms deal with a scenario of your own in order to see how you would navigate the important questions you need to ask when you embark on this type of project. So I'd just like to introduce our team this morning. I'm Sanette Stein. I am the academic literacy lead at CEA. And then we have Robert Prince. He's our test development coordinator, and he will be running the second of the breakout rooms. And then we also have Precious Mudavanu, who is our statistician and psychometrician at CEA, and she'll be running the third of the breakout rooms. And then we'd also just like to thank our other colleague, Tatiana Sanger, who contributed to the planning for today's session. And then we'd like to thank Marilla and Fatima for their support today and in the process of preparing for this, as well as their colleague Elias, who helped out last week. And from UCT, our other colleagues, Riashna and Dimak Khatso, we'd like to thank them for helping us set everything up for this. Okay, so just a few little housekeeping things. The session will be recorded, and as I said, it will be available afterwards, but the breakout room sessions will not be recorded. So the main sort of recorded artifact from that will be the document that you will be working on during those sessions. The slide decks will be shared with you in PDF format afterwards, so you will also have access to the scenarios that you'll be working with, as well as the other scenarios that the other groups will be looking at. Yeah, so with that, I think we can start. So as I said, this is sort of the second of these two, and this time we are sort of assuming that we have now a better understanding of our diagnostic instruments and where they sort of come from, where those data points are, etc. And now we want to try and connect the dots between the data and the curricula, and in order to connect the dots to the appropriate support. So just having the data itself is not enough. We need to put the diagnostic information into conversation with the curricula in order to make use of it. And for that purpose, we have typically 3 types of data at our disposal. We have historical data from the cohort, the similar cohorts that have, say, done a particular course previously, as well as performance on a particular course as our sort of view of what has happened in the past and what are the typical sort of trends that we can observe. Then we have our qualitative data, which are typically observations that we've made about the context, about the course, maybe pain points that we've identified, or typical features that we need to take into account of the context of the course. And finally, we have our diagnostic data, which is sort of the additional information that we have to sort of try and help build that picture of the student profile. Can I just ask that we all make sure that our mics are on mute? Okay, thank you. Then once we have this understanding of the cohort and how it relates to the content of a particular course, we are in a position where we can make decisions about the type of support that our students would need and how we would go about creating those spaces. So let's look at an example of how we could do this. So you've seen some of this data before. We used it in last week's class, in last week's webinar. But yeah, so we're looking at data from a first-year mainstream mathematics course. First, we have our historical data on the course. We see here some important facts like the median grade for over the past 3 years was 59%.
Yes, you know, totally forgot. And I just spoke. I remember.
Sorry, just make sure that everyone is muted, please. And the 3-year pass rate has been about 71%. So this is a course where quite a number of the students are not passing, and in this particular institution, it has been identified as a course impeding graduation. So these are some of the things that we would want to notice. We look at the median pass grade, we look at the pass rate, and then we can also look at trends within the distribution of the course grade. So in this case, we could see that in 2021, there was also a slight shift in the distribution of the grades at the end. So it seems like students in the 2021 group were having more trouble than the cohorts from previous years, which is something we want to take into account when we're moving into the teaching for the 2022 group as well. So now, if we've looked at the historical data in terms of the course, we then sort of need a more qualitative look at what we want to understand about that course. So you might identify some typical pain points in the course, say areas, skills, concepts and skills that may not be covered in the NSC that were maybe supposed to be covered. Maybe that's in terms of the difference between what the stated curriculum is, what the taught curriculum is, and what the assessed curriculum is. So that's something that we need to know. We need to know what was actually assessed, what was actually taught in class, and how that differs from what is part of the documents that outline what's in the curriculum that precedes whatever we do. So if it is in a second year course at university, this applies to what went on in our first year courses. But in the case of the first year courses, this might be what has been happening in the NSC or other exit level type of qualifications that in those curricula. So we have that as one thing. Then we would look at things like how does the experience of being a student in this course differ from what they might have been used to before they entered this course. Now, typically, first years, they struggle with things like the increased workload and very new, different modes of delivery, etc. So all of those things have an impact. But specifically, you'd like to look at how do we assess our content and to what extent are students familiar with the types of tasks we are using for our assessments. So what we essentially need to do is we want to, as I said, know the difference between the state taught and assessed curricula. We need to then also keep in mind what when we are reflecting on what we have what we expect from our students with our assessments. We need to scaffold or support according to those things and endeavor to bridge any gaps that there might be between what we need them to be and where they are. And then finally, we also need to be very cautious about the assumptions we make in terms of the foundations they might have in this discipline or any related discipline. Then in terms of course, artifacts, we would try and map out what type of different engagements do we require in our course. So to what extent do they need to use the textbook? Are they using it individually, independently for the most part, or are they sort of like guided reading sessions? What type of requirement is there in terms of having them deal with those materials? And then also the format of the lectures. To how dense are they in terms of information? Are there auxiliary materials that are available, etc. So all of those things we need to take into account. We need to understand how it is that students engage with the various types of information we share in the various modes and how comfortable they are with using those modes. And then in terms of our assessments, we need to sort of get a sense of what the sort of implicit things are that our assessments are requiring. So instead of just looking at the conceptual understanding or the skills that are linked to our outcomes for our own course, we might also need to look at the skills that are sort of assumed when we give them a particular task. And then in terms of all of these things, there are three things we need to keep in mind. Textbooks and lectures can be dense, and any trouble in this understanding minute details may impact their overall understanding. And then sometimes the content in our resources assume foundational knowledge that may actually be part of the NSC curriculum, but there was no time to cover that in the actual teaching of the curriculum. And this is particularly true of the last 2 years. There might have been gaps left because there was some disruption in terms of the teaching, and then finally sort of that awareness of the implicit skills required. So okay, if we then look at our data for the cohort, there are a couple of things that we want to know. Obviously, we would want to know the size of the cohort enrolled for the particular course, but then we can also look at things like the NSC grades, the average grades. Here we find that they are sort of fairly high averages here, and this cohort's performance in terms of the NSC English and NSC mathematics has been consistent with those of past years. So nothing really new in this group in terms of their performance on those things. And then in terms of the performance on the MBTs, we can see that more than 25% of these students would need, or in the intermediate band for the QL and the maths, so that, and as well as for the AL, which would mean that they would need some sort of support. And it's also important to note that we even have some students in the basic bands for QL and mathematics. Now, considering that this is a mathematics course, this is very important information to keep in mind. So if we go further, we also have access to subdomain level analyses of our MBT scores, right? So this is one of the important diagnostic bits that we have at our disposal. So these are box and whisker plots, and they show the distribution of student scores on the different subdomains of each of the 3 domains that are assessed. They plot out 5 important numbers in terms of that range: the minimum score, the first quartile, the median, the third quartile, and then the maximum scored. And the median is basically either the mean of the middle 2 numbers or the middle number if we sort all of the scores, either ascending or descending. And the first quartile is then the median between there, so that 24 dividing the group into quarters rather than into halves. And then we have the third quartile is then also the median between the median and that which is above that median score. And then it is possible, as you can see, that you can have some outliers. So basically, when we're looking at that minimum to the first quartile, we're looking at the lowest 25% of the scores for that particular subdomain. So the 25% of the cohort that scored the lowest were within that range. So important things for us to notice here, typically, usually, is where are the lowest medians. So, for example, this text genre one we would look at to see, okay, where are the areas where 50% or more of my cohort are struggling with a particular aspect, and just take note of any of the subdomains where the range of performance in that subdomain is also very wide, meaning that within that group we have some that are really struggling with a particular subdomain, but others that are doing really, really well and don't need as much support. So in this case, we had we've marked the lowest medians, we've marked the widest ranges, and for every one of these we've also provided a short description of what each of these the subdomains that we've highlighted here would mean. So when we deal with these in the groups, you can look at the descriptions of what each subdomain is, and hopefully you sort of try and make sense of how that would then relate to your curriculum. Now, the other analysis on here is our relative importance analysis. And this is basically a it represents a multiple linear regression analysis using the MBT subdomains and the final course grade. So this is, again, some historical data comparing, say, the final course grade of the previous year, or perhaps even over a period of time, to performance on the individual subdomains. In essence, what it does is it compares the relationship between the final course grade and performance on each of the subdomains to try and determine the sort of which of the subdomains explain the most of the variance in the course grade. So in other words, which subdomains had the strongest relationship in terms of performance, because that might suggest that those are subdomains that we need to take note of. If we have them having a very strong relationship here, but we also note that students are struggling with them in our subdomain analyses, then we know that this is something we need to pay particular attention to. It's very important when looking at this to remember that the strong relationship between a subdomain and the final score in a course does not necessarily mean just that that subdomain is present in the curriculum. It could also be that that particular subdomain is assessed in a way that assesses a similar type of thinking to what is required in the course. And we'll look at some examples of that later on, but one example would be in geometric reasoning, where you have basically are presented with facts. You may have to make certain inferences based on that facts, and you use that to build an argument and prove something. So that type of use of facts, information, so being able to extrapolate extract the right information, make the right inferences, and then apply that to a particular problem, could we be simulating the type of thinking that is applied when you are busy with a question within geometric reasoning. So we've highlighted the highest 5 related to that. So we're going to break out into the breakaway rooms now. Each of our 3 facilitators will just present the sort of be present in the session so that you can ask certain questions. But essentially what you're going to do is answer a couple of questions about the scenario. So you're going to talk about your own context, certain features that you would pick out in the data that you might want to focus on, and what the implications are for teaching. And then you're going to have time to work on what you would suggest in terms of designing support for students in a cohort like this, and talk about how you believe that would help you. So important here is that if the scenario that you in the group are working with is not something that you are familiar with yourself, you are welcome to use examples from your own context to say, if this is what my group's profile looked like, these are the things that I would anticipate they have trouble with, and these are the types of things that I think I could do in order to provide them with support. So we'll break out into the breakaway rooms then. After that, we'll come back to plenary, have a feedback session, and then we have 2 questions that you'll do while we are in the plenary session. You will find that your facilitators will be sharing a Google document that one of the group will have to edit in order to record your responses. But you will also, when we get to the plenary session, be able to individually access these documents and insert your thoughts on there. So please feel free to edit those. Everyone should have access to that. Okay, so we'll go to the breakout rooms now then. I'm going to stop sharing for the moment. And we will be back in about 35 minutes. So see you guys in there.
Hi, Sanette.
Hi.
Are we back in plenary?
So I don't know if everyone managed to, yes, we're back in plenary now. Sorry, things went very, very fast there. So we have
Yeah,
about,
we've just done part 1.
Yeah.
and maybe with you guys having done part 1 and us having done actually only part 2, that will work out.
Okay, good.
We also did
yeah.
just part 1.
Yeah,
So how do we get back into
we,
plenary?
so I think we
I
are
set it up.
already, yeah, so I
We're
think
all
we
in
are
plenary.
automatically ready and plenary. So we'll leave our comments then until the other 2 groups have done feedback on what they discussed in part 1, and then our group has discussed part 2, but not really part 1. So we'll go last. Is that okay with everyone? Okay. So before we continue then, did everyone manage to add those sort of record their discussion in the files on the Google Drive? Because what I'll do is I'll share then the slides that you've been working on in this sort of in the meeting, and hopefully we can see everyone's done. So let's maybe go with group 2 first, the applied biology group. Okay. So who's your spokesperson? You have the floor.
Sanette, it is Masego.
Okay, Masego, go ahead. You can just tell me where you need me to go in terms of the screen. It's
Go
just
to
still
the
loading.
slide where we had to populate it.
Slide 2. Okay. Okay. Hopefully we can display this. Okay, it's just taking a little bit. Here we go. Okay, Masego, take it away.
I'm just having a bit of network issues.
Okay. Anyone else from that group maybe want to help her out?
Yeah, I can do it. Yeah, so just going through it very quickly. The first, for question 1, how does the scenario compare to our context? It was most of us didn't quite know about our NSC and MBT scores, but in general, for the ones who did, we found that ours were a little bit lower than the ones in the course we were given. And then we had quite a similar pass rate, which was a high pass rate. And then we also said in our courses that we had bespoke tests, which had medium to high averages. So we, even though we didn't have that data for this course, we did have that, but there was also wide distribution in our courses between the low and high scores. And then for the second question, so given what you know of the cohort profile and the course grade history, what are the specific concerns you would have about this course? So firstly, looking at the NSC and NBT scores, we saw that there was quite a big gap between the NSC and NBT scores, with the NBT scores being much lower. So this told us that there must be a gap in what students have learned at school, which was tested by NSC, and then what they actually needed to know for university, which was NBT. And then we felt that the NBT quantitative literacy explained the performance in the course, because nearly a third of the students were inside that intermediate category. And then also the same for academic literacy, where nearly 20% were in the intermediate band. And then we didn't quite get to finish question 3 because we're going to go back to it. But basically for the challenges, we thought this cohort would have with curricular assessments and exercise. We just basically said that all of them would need curricular assessment and exercise literacy may need to be addressed. And then that's as far as we go with that. And then I can't see the end of the bottom one, so let me just switch to my screen. Yeah, so then what are the implications? We thought that there would need to be a focus on academic writing and perhaps use a scaffolded approach where you start with easier exercises and make them slightly harder or what they need to be as the course goes on. Then we also obviously needed to focus on the quantitative literacy, which we saw in the previous question. And then our idea was to have a boot camp on the quantitative academic and computer literacy. We added computer literacy because now things being online, we can't just assume students know how or have high computer literacy skills. And this will help get the students used to what might appear in the course and act as a bridge for the students that needed the help. And then also just having support during the course, and specifically highlighting the topics or the parts that we felt the students weren't doing so well in. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so that was for scenario 2. Just for those that that were not in the group, this group looked at a applied biology course in health sciences as an example, so that would sort of explain why some of those differences in terms of the overall performance in the course were slightly different in terms of NSC scores and MBT scores a little bit. But yeah, interesting examples. Okay, so I'm going to go to scenario 3 now. So who is your spokesperson?
All right, so that's going to be me, Bradley. I'll just go straight to the responses. Sanet, you may go ahead and give a summary of our the scenario that we're dealing with. But responding to the question, so the first one, how does this scenario compare to your context? What we spoke about was that the alignment between assessments and curriculum is definitely an issue across the board. So we also mentioned that there is a need to mediate the key content in prescribed textbooks and resources. So we'll delve deeper into the issue here on those prescribed textbooks and the resources. And then we also mentioned that students should also be familiar with the kind of assessments, assessment practices used in the course. So and we said that then gets us moving into a scenario. The second question then was, given what you know of the cohort profile and the course grade history, what are the specific concerns you would have about this course? Now, there may be an issue where many students may be perceived, to have lower grades. So it forces the lecturer to have lower expectations on that. And so it then raises a need to support students from the onset. So proactive support as opposed to providing reactive support. And then there was an interesting comment. I'll read it as it was written. It says there are definitely deficits. Not taking a deficit approach here, it's not the student's fault, but there is a gap to be bridged. Perhaps doing bridging courses at the start of the year or having additional sources that students may actually use may actually be of great help. Now, the third question was regarding the course details. What challenges do you think this cohort would have with the curricula or assessments or exercises in this course? And you know, a lot of the textbooks are very Eurocentric, so it's international textbooks, and that content can be a challenge. So the students are sometimes unfamiliar with the examples, but again, they are trying to learn a new concept. So they are trying to grasp the concept. They are trying to understand the context in which it is set. So that example, and there is a huge challenge there. We also spoke about the idea of language. So sometimes the vocabulary that's used may not necessarily be the same as the vocabulary that the students are used to. And again, an interesting comment, I would also say a challenge is academic literacy. So knowing how to engage with the discipline and how to write and read like an economist. I mean, if somebody just finished matric and they're now doing their macroeconomics, do they really know and understand how to write like an economist?
Mm.
What are the implications of teaching this course and assessment? Well, we said we could possibly incorporate local examples and texts. So as much as we can use material that's developed internationally, we can then incorporate our local examples. And we could also consider open educational resources. We also mentioned having a review of content covered in metric in order to achieve alignment between metric and tertiary. So in this instance, again, going back to the idea of proactive support that we could give to the students. We also spoke about the idea of a glossary of key terms relating to macroeconomics, maybe where students are struggling with some of the terminologies. And then we also mentioned the idea of giving students practice and authentic assessments. So these are assessments relating to their to day-to-day challenges, so that they can become a bit more familiar with the assessment types, with the way a lot of the questions will be structured, and how they'll be assessed throughout their macroeconomics journey. And I think in a nutshell, that covers our discussion.
Okay. Thank you, Bradley, and thank you, Sarah, for sharing the previous one. Okay, so so this was macroeconomics, the first year economics course in the first semester that they were looking at. So where's the other scenario? I'm hoping this is the one we already looked at. And now everything is in the way up there by the tabs. Okay, so the group I facilitated, we looked at a first year psychology course, and Dewe is going to take us through the discussion of potential support that we identified that they could use. I'm just going to give it a moment to just catch up with me, and then she'll sort of, so perhaps Lindiwe, you can say something about whether or not there was something in the scenario that you could identify as being something your students would also have issues with and that sort of thing.
Okay, thanks, Annette. Yes, there are issues that one could identify with perhaps looking at a core course that is taken by the entire student population, that is our first year students, wherein you would find that especially in the first semester, because although it's an academic literacy course, but at the beginning it's very generic. So then for students to really that is find their way around, it could really take some time, and you find that they struggle in the meantime, and they're finding it quite difficult to actually come to grips with the entire course. Yes, so there are similarities, although I'm also certain that even in actual other in other mainstream courses, this could be also the situation wherein you'd find students struggling with the concept and the content of the course, such that you'd find that in that particular course, perhaps you find a high what I would call a high failure rate, wherein students are actually finding it difficult to understand the content as well as the concepts that are used.
Okay, so you can take us through some of what we discussed. There were examples from support within, additional resources outside, and support from student support services that were suggested.
Okay, then looking at the kind of students that we had, and these students, when we looked at them, they were not performing at the same level as the other, that is students who had done the course before in previous years. And also this one, the ones who were there was also a high percentage of repeaters. So then we realized that there is a support that perhaps that these students could be given. So we thought in terms of tutors, that if maybe they could be allocated tutors who would take them through, and these tutors wouldn't be using different material, but they actually be using the very same material that is used in class, just so that they are close to them, they spend a lot of time with them, they try and simplify and talk perhaps in a language that they're also able to understand. And there's also a suggestion perhaps of even creating a blog wherein the lecturer would also have some time with the students, because we realize that this kind of implied that more time should be spent with the students. That's why we then suggested the tutors, and also the issue that the lecturers could also spend some time trying to answer a student's question, trying to assist and kind of scaffold in any other possible way that is there. I don't know, did I leave out anything?
No, I think in terms of the first one, that was it. And then the additional resources. Should I just quickly summarize? So
okay,
in terms
please.
of additional resources, there was the suggestion that perhaps a workbook could be created to go with the textbook, so that there's additional support and scaffolding through those exercises, and it will provide more exercises and practice. And another suggestion, and this was something that was similar to what was being used at the institution of the person who suggested that. And then in terms of student support services or things like foundational courses, we talked about perhaps having foundational courses that focus on mathematical and quantitative skills, because there needs to be a focus on building understandings within those types of thinking. Okay, does that, I think that sort of captures it.
Yes.
Lindy, did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
No, I think you've captured almost everything. Yes, that I'd like.
Okay, thank you, Lindiwe. So that's the feedback thing from the discussions. Anyone want to maybe comment on a part that they did not that was not included in their discussion within the group, that they might want to comment on now while we are switching from one PowerPoint to the next? Okay. So there aren't any comments. I think we should move on into part 3. Okay, so part 3 is divided into two questions. This is we are just going to do in plenary, so we're not going to be dividing into groups. But there are sort of 2 questions here, and what we would like you to do is anyone that has access to the slide decks that you've been working on within your group discussions, you can add your comments to that as a working document in response to these questions. So you'll see there is a little text box available. So please feel free to add that if you're not going to speak up in the session. So the first is, how feasible is it for you to create or implement the types of support you were suggesting or that you identified would be needed? So things like, do you have the capacity within your unit to do this in terms of both expertise and time? Are there any financial implications? Would you need changes to policy in order to implement it? Would it need to be would it necessitate a recurriculation of the course? Are there any internal or external bodies like councils and boards where your students will need to register one day that need to authorize this type of thing, that sort of thing? And then will you have buy-in from your colleagues in trying to create this type of support? So that's the first question. And the second question is, are there colleagues maybe in other units and departments that you feel you would need to collaborate with, or that you could potentially share resources with, and who are they and how would you go about that? So anyone want to comment on this? Any ideas? Would it be easy for you to implement some of what you've suggested? Can't see the chat, so you'll have to open your mic and start talking, or perhaps someone needs to tell me if there's something I need to check in the chat.
Sanad, in our institution, this is actually handled by the Title Division. So in that case, perhaps then it means we'd have to escalate the request to them and explain to them that this is the kind of assistance that we need, because we don't have tutors that belong to the department or that belong to the school. They actually they are kind of managed. Yeah, they're managed by Chattel. Yes.
Okay, so if you were to make use of that, that's an existing structure within the institution, but you would need to negotiate with them for providing bespoke support for this particular course or for additional courses.
Yes, that would be the case. Sure.
Okay, and do you think, would you have support from your colleagues in trying to get that sort of thing up off the ground?
Yes, I believe I would have support from colleagues.
Okay, anyone else? Some of you suggested some support things in your discussion within part one, perhaps.
Yes, can I
Yes,
just
go ahead.
It's just a comment or question that I would like to raise in relation to the discussion we had in our group. The need to provide targeted support right from the offset. And you look at that in the light of like numbers of students that we have in some of the programs, especially in the commercial area. How feasible is it? I would love to hear from colleagues if that is a challenge, just the numbers, but also the range, the wide range of students that we have.
Yeah, so basically what you're raising here is two things. Is what type of format of support would you need for the numbers of students that you have potentially? So is the support that you have in mind appropriate for providing it to large numbers? And the other thing is whether or not within these groups there might be more groupings possible with differing needs, and how you would tackle that. Does that sort of sum up what you're asking, commenting, Ephraim?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Any thoughts, colleagues?
May I try to respond, Sanette?
Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, Ephraim, I think you're asking a very important question, and that is that if we are determining that students need support, we have to make a point of trying to actually provide that support. And in some cases, the support required is quite large, as you are indicating. And in some cases, it needs very focused attention. So I would strongly suggest that we look at diagnostic information, whether it's from the NBT, NSC, or any other instruments that is being used in the sector, that we then use that to determine the students who need the support the most, and not avoid the situation where or find ourselves in a situation where we don't provide any support because we don't want to take on the challenge. I think we have to take on the challenge. It's important for us to take on the challenge so that we actually make a difference. Thanks.
Yeah, very important. And it comes back to that idea that we have to support the students that we have in front of us and their needs. And we have these different types of information available to us. So if we have it available, we ought to be using it to make the appropriate provisions for support for students. Any other comments? Perhaps on the second question here about whether or not there are perhaps other units and departments you would like to collaborate with or could share resources with. I know in some places one of the typical complaints is that the people are working in silos and not working together, and in that way there's the same thing is happening in several places where they could have just worked together on those things. So any thoughts on that? Any suggestions there or things to comment on?
Well, one thing we try to do in our course, well, the courses I work with, is we have sections or parts that we know a couple students battle with within different units and departments. So, for example, even we spoke about it in our when we went through our review as digital literacy. And then we use sort of like a diagnostic assessment to then see how much students know, and then use adaptive learning to see whether they need to go through this section or not. So, and then because now everything's online, we can then put that same section into multiple courses. So that really helped us to share solutions for people who are having the same problem. And then based on how students do in their diagnostic assessment, it either is visible to them or not, and then obviously providing support on that for those students.
Thank you for that. So that's a sort of a shared resource for support that you have. That's good. Anyone else with comments?
It's Rassi speaking. Sanet, colleagues, I think it's just very, very important. I don't know, I mean, our Northwest University has got a strategic planning unit. So this would be the unit that would support all departments at the university in terms of strategic planning with credible data. So just thinking about what we're doing with diagnostic assessment and the importance of data, to us, the strategic planning unit, our Strat Intel unit, will be one of the most important stakeholders to provide support in terms of training, how to engage with data, but also to help with the strategic planning, because the fact that you're using a textbook and the data provided, it's clear to see that there's conceptual problems with using that textbook needs to feed into the operational planning of the faculties and the departments that deal with psychology, the example that we work with. So I believe the Strat Intel unit is of utmost importance to collaborate with them on data in terms of strategic planning, but also to support with building the capacity of the university to engage with credible data and data analytics. Thanks, Annette.
Thank you for that. Okay, yeah, so definitely within your university structures, there are various units that could be useful in trying to sort these out, all the way from people that can help you access data and understand data to help you planning in the planning of these things, and perhaps even colleagues that are working in the cognate subjects to the ones that you are presenting, or perhaps the other things that students within your programs are studying. You might want to collaborate on how you tackle some of those assessments, etc., and some of those support strategies. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to go into our concluding remarks, and then we could have some more questions. But so what we've tried to do in this webinar today was to try and expose you to the sort of important questions you need to ask yourself when you are dealing with this type of information, and try and simulate what you would need to do if you had access to to this type of information about the cohorts you're working with. So I would like to mention that a lot of you are not representing a course here, but rather a support structure. And for you, the cohorts might be set up a little bit differently, but you would still want access to that type of data in order to create the appropriate type of things within your unit. So we use the scenarios to try and show how you would go from knowing the profile of your student to relating that to the curriculum, and through that process then come up with curriculum interventions that are in a way assessment led, because it's led through the diagnostic data that you have analyzed. So it's crucial that for both our curricula and the additional support in student support structures that we provide is informed by this type of information. Being responsive in our designs starts with knowing as much as possible about our students and about our courses, or about our contexts. For those of you who are interested in receiving reports that look like the ones that we've been using here for the scenarios, or who would like to engage with us on trying to understand the MBT subdomains a little bit better in terms of your specific course, so say doing the domain mapping exercises, which we have done for other units before, you are welcome to get in touch with the team, and we can work with you on going to analyze your artifacts and your data sets. So I'm just going to see if there are any questions in the chat that we still need to do. Okay. So any questions from your sides, or any burning things that you would want to discuss before we end off the session? Because I believe we are about 10 minutes over time now. So anyone want a final comment or question? Okay, so if there isn't anyone, you are welcome to also send us questions after the session's ended, just so that you have the contact details. Here they are. You can send us requests for reports, etc. And as you will have seen in the some of the scenarios, not all of those programs were programs where students, for example, had to write the MBT, but you can still match the data of those students that did write the MBT. So it is still possible to do those scenarios or do those analyses, even if it is not a compulsory thing for your institution. But that, just so you keep that in mind. And then, yeah, thank you very much for engaging with us today in these discussions. In terms of what happens now after the workshop, we will there will be a post-workshop survey that Marilla and the team will share, and yeah, and at some point in the next few days, the recording of today's session will also be made available. You will also still have access to the Google Docs that you have at the moment for about the rest of the day. So if you would like to add any comments that you think of over the course of the rest of the day, you are welcome to add that to those PowerPoint slides. We are going to use that to compile a report that will be shared with everyone. Yeah, so you'll have access to that as well as the recordings. And we will also be sharing a complete slide deck with the scenarios included. You see there's a comment there now. Okay. So yeah, from my side, thank you very much. Maybe Robert or Precious would like to say something as well, but thank you very much from my side for your participation today, and I hope it was productive for you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone. It was a great session.
Thank you, everybody. I'd like to especially say thank you to the CA team, and I will be emailing a short evaluation survey to everybody a little bit later today, and really would encourage you and request that you do take a few minutes to fill it in, because your feedback is really useful for these sessions. Thank you so much. Wishing everyone a good day further.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.